How do the smartest people truly win? They don't rush to speak, they don't waste energy arguing, and they don't spend time trying to prove themselves to anyone. They don't play to impress the crowd or to get the loudest applause. Instead, they sit quietly, observing the entire scene, watching patterns unfold, and waiting. When the right moment arrives, they make their move quietly, precisely, and win without uttering a single word. Friedrich Nietzsche grasped this truth more deeply than almost anyone. He wasn't chasing popularity. He didn't care about being accepted. He didn't even care if people understood him. His focus was singular: power. But not the kind that shouts for attention or demands recognition. The kind he sought was invisible power that works behind the scenes, power that shifts reality without raising its voice. And Nietzsche understood a critical truth: words are noise, and silence is leverage. We live in a culture addicted to noise. Talk more, post more, defend yourself, make yourself heard. Every channel is full of people broadcasting constantly, but very few are truly thinking. That's where the genuinely smart people set themselves apart. They don't operate on the same wavelength as the rest. They don't rush into speech. They don't explain themselves unnecessarily. They're not chasing quick reactions. They understand what Nietzsche saw with startling clarity. Every time you speak, you give something away. And the more you reveal, the less power you hold. Let that sink in, because in a world where people overshare, overreact, and overexpose, the person who says the least can easily become the most dangerous person in the room. Nietzsche believed real intelligence had little to do with speaking more eloquently, was about knowing when not to speak at all. Silence carries an effect that words can't replicate. It creates uncertainty. It forces people to project their own assumptions. It makes them doubt. And in that uncertain space, you gain control, not by forcing them to see you a certain way, but by denying them anything solid to attack. That's the real genius. You don't reveal your plan, your weaknesses, or even much of your presence. You sit there composed, unreadably, and others start talking more. They over-explain. They justify themselves. They reveal things they shouldn't. That's how the smartest people win, by letting others unravel themselves. Nietzsche once wrote, "Those who know they are profound strive for clarity. Those who would like to seem profound strive for obscurity." In other words, truly intelligent people don't need to put on a show of mystery. They are clear, they are grounded, and often they are silent because they know that mystery isn't something you manufacture. It's something you protect. And protection begins with saying less. Think about how most people lose power. They argue with people who aren't worth answering. They try to explain their intentions to those who've already made up their minds. They react emotionally when silence would have been far stronger. All of it is leakage, all of it is surrendering leverage. It's weakness dressed up as communication. But the smartest players work differently. They see silence not as passivity, but as strategy. Because when you say nothing, something fascinating happens. People start guessing. They start assuming. They start overthinking. And in that guessing, they give away more than you ever gave them. They try to interpret your quiet. They try to read your emotions. They try to predict your next move. And with every wrong guess, you quietly win. This is the core of Nietzsche's concept of power, the ability to see the game and refuse to play it on someone else's terms. Here's the reality. If you speak out of emotion, you've already lost control. If you explain yourself just to be understood, you're already giving ground. If you feel the need to make people get your point, you've already handed away the power you should have kept. Because you don't need to be understood, you need to be effective. And effectiveness doesn't come from shouting or from being liked. It comes from knowing exactly what to withhold. And when Nietzsche lived this truth, in his lifetime, he was not widely liked. He was misunderstood, rejected, often left in isolation. But he carried a knowledge most people never touch. The truth doesn't need an audience, it only needs a spine. And that's the lesson most people miss. They think being heard is the goal, that being seen is the prize, that being loud proves strength. Nietzsche would have said the opposite. Your real power begins the moment you become okay with being silent. The moment you stop broadcasting every thought. The moment you stop seeking approval from those who don't even understand themselves. When you can sit in silence, when you can walk away without defending yourself, when you can be insulted and feel nothing, you've already won. And the reason is simple. Control over others begins with control over yourself. Silence is the ultimate proof of that control, but there's a twist. Silence is not simply the absence of speaking, it's the creation of psychological space. When you don't respond to provocation, you signal strength. When you don't react emotionally, you display stability. When you don't explain every move, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability, that's how the smartest people dominate, without saying a word. Because if people can't predict you, they can't prepare for you. They can't manipulate you. They can't control the frame. Instead, they start adjusting to you, watching you, reacting to you. That's when you shift. From follower to force, not through charm or persuasion, but through a presence sharpened by silence. That's what we'll explore in the next section. The moment silence transforms from a passive state into your most powerful weapon, how to use it to change the energy of a room, alter a conversation, even reshape your identity without saying anything. They've mastered the one skill most people avoid. Emotional control. Not just self-control, not just discipline, but complete unshakable command over what they reveal and when. Most people don't realize this. Every word you speak is a window. Every reaction is a confession. Every emotional outburst is an admission that says, I'm not in control, you are. Nietzsche didn't care about playing fair. He cared about playing real. And real power wasn't about constant dominance. It was about restraint. He saw what most people miss, that your silence can be louder than your defense. That your lack of reaction can be more unsettling than your anger. And that when you stop responding, people reveal exactly who they are and what you mean to them. The truth is, people will test you. Not always consciously, but emotionally. They will push to find your limits. They will provoke to see where you flinch. They will watch to learn how easily they can shake you. And once they discover they can, they lose respect, not because they're malicious, but because human nature works that way. We respect stillness because it's rare. We respect silence because it signals mastery. We respect those who don't flinch because we know how hard that is. Nietzsche didn't frame silence as submission. He saw it as transcendence. He believed the one who can hold back words, reactions, and the need to be understood is operating at a higher level of awareness. Once you no longer need anything from anyone, you become impossible to manipulate. That's the secret the smartest people protect. They aren't detached because they're cold. They're detached because they've moved past the need to convince. They let others talk. They let the insecure rush to speak. They let the arrogant show off. They let the loud reveal their fragility. And in their quiet, they learn everything. Because here's how power really works. The one who speaks less sees more. The one who reacts less controls more. The one who explains less intimidates more. All of this comes from emotional stillness. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot put his thoughts on ice should not enter into the heat of dispute." In other words, if you can't cool your emotions, you have no place in high-stakes situations. Power isn't about winning every battle, it's about knowing which battles are beneath you. Most people fail because they engage with every insult, reply to every comment, try to fix every misunderstanding. In doing so, they drain themselves and reveal themselves. Silence is uncomfortable, and most people would rather blurt something out than sit in the tension of being unreadable. But the wise have learned to be comfortable there. They've trained themselves to stay calm while others spiral, explain, argue, or try to prove themselves. Silence, after all, creates frame control. In any group, the one who controls the emotional tone controls the space, and nothing changes the tone faster than unexpected calm. When everyone expects anger and you respond with stillness, you shift the frame. When they expect agreement and you give nothing, you reset the conversation. When they expect panic and you remain detached, you show who's really in control. That's the ultimate move, not just calmness, but remaining undefined. And that's the power of silence. It keeps you unlabeled, unpredictable. What can't be labeled is often feared. Nietzsche thought modern people suffer because they're too available, too quick to speak, too eager to explain, too willing to expose themselves for the sake of connection. But connection without boundaries isn't strength. Once you start withholding your time, your presence, your words, people see you differently, not as mysterious for its own sake, but as valuable, because value comes from scarcity, and silence is the ultimate scarcity signal. It says, "I'm not here for performance. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here by choice, and I can leave at any moment." Most people never reach that level because it demands emotional detachment as well as control. Nietzsche believed that without detachment from the ego, you'll always be a puppet of your environment. The ego wants to speak, to be right, to defend, to be seen. But the deeper self, the one Nietzsche valued, is the self that can sit in its own presence without needing to perform. When you become that person, you change every situation you walk into. You're no longer part of the emotional marketplace. You're not trading attention or approval. You're not giving people the satisfaction of knowing your stance until it's too late for them to counter you. That's the highest form of winning. Silently, by the time they realize what happened, you've already acted, taken the opportunity, redirected the outcome, all without a word. You didn't speak. You didn't react. You didn't defend. You simply let silence build tension and let their own minds do the rest. That's how the smartest win, not with volume, not with proof, but with precision. Nietzsche understood this perfectly. To him, silence was not weakness or absence, it was warfare. Because when you stop speaking to be understood, you force the world to respond to your presence instead of your explanations. That's true power. The world is loud people arguing about who's right, begging to be heard, explaining themselves endlessly in the hope of being understood. But the wise move differently. They don't need to win the conversation. They don't need praise for their insight. They don't need to correct every opinion. They know a truth most never grasp. If you stay silent long enough, people will show you exactly who they are. In negotiations, the first to speak often loses. In conflict, the first to react often loses control. In relationships, Over-explaining often costs respect. In leadership, the quietest person is often heard the most. Why? Because silence isn't absence, it's pressure. And pressure makes people reveal themselves. That's the advantage Nietzsche wrote about, even if he didn't frame it in today's language. People fear what they can't read. They fear unpredictability. They fear the one who doesn't react, because that means he knows something. And the longer you stay quiet, the more they project their own fears, assumptions, and stories onto you. Some will think you're powerful. Others will think you're dangerous. Some will see wisdom. Others will imagine cruelty. None of it matters. What matters is you gave them nothing real to hold. When people can't define you, they can't control you. That's the final form of quiet power, being unreadable. Nietzsche once said, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." He wasn't talking about friendship, he meant influence. The strongest influence is the kind people don't see coming. The smartest people don't need to be recognized. They don't need the spotlight. They don't need to defend themselves. They create an unspoken gravity of presence that says, "I see everything, and I owe you nothing." When you carry that energy, you never have to prove yourself, people feel it. That's not arrogance, that's discipline, that's ownership, that's psychological dominance without a word. Nietzsche saw that most people need to talk, to be liked, to be validated. But true individuality begins the moment you become indifferent to all of that, not bitter, not numb, simply above it. Master silence. And you become harder to provoke, harder to offend, harder to read. People lose access to your inner world, and what they can't access, they start to respect, fear, desire, or follow. That's influence, not manipulation, not dominance through force, but control through absence, in a room full of loud voices. The one who says nothing commands the most attention, might by charm, but by stillness, not by persuasion, but by presence. Nietzsche summed it up. It's not the strength, but the endurance of great sentiments that makes great men. In other words, your most powerful moves aren't the loudest, they're the most consistent. The consistency of your silence, your self-control, and your restraint is what makes you formidable. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply arrives, sits quietly, and observes. That's the lesson. You don't need to say anything. You just need to be so complete within yourself that your silence becomes the loudest thing in the room. That's what the smartest do. They watch, they wait, they absorb, and when the time comes, they act not with noise, not with ego, but with precision. And by the time anyone realizes, it's already over. They've won quietly, permanently, and you never even saw it coming.